There we go. I want to welcome everyone to what I cannot believe is the 15th, the final dig in the entire series. We started back in June, and we have gone continuously every Wednesday all the way through until tonight. And after tonight, you're going to realize how this all was planned, how it all came together, because it actually goes back several years. But at the outset, the one thing that we were all talking about, because we have this global shared reality, and we're hopefully crawling out of our pandemic caves, the one thing that we know that we can do is break bread and share stories. And that's what we've done over the last 15 weeks. And if you haven't seen them, or if you weren't here for one of those Wednesdays, they're all available on YouTube. And we'll be sending out additional links after tonight, because we'll be kicking it into gear, because this year we really celebrated, the Senate bar, and you're gonna realize tonight why the Senate bar was so important in this whole effort. Not just because of the speakeasies and all of the great speakeasy culture, because Pueblo was a thought leader there. But first I want to thank Ken and Gina, who are in the back. They're the owners of the Senate bar. So they've put up with us every Wednesday, but it's been great fun. And it just goes to show you what you can do. Who would have thought that we would have this many people? Almost 1,000 people have come over these 15 Wednesdays. So I think that's extraordinary in its own right. And they're Pueblo stories. That's the best part about it. So then I want to give a big shout out to Justin Brager, who has been leading the film crew. He's back in the back there. And one of the reasons that we wanted these to be not only broadcast live, which we're doing now, but also we wanted these to be archived. And we're already working with teachers from elementary, junior high school, even college. And these first-person accounts, these stories are really important in sharing Pueblo's great storytelling tradition. So a shout out to Justin, and Jeff has been operating the cameras here. And then Sam here is tonight. Sam Ebersol has helped out quite a bit. So we're really fortunate to have such great resources, especially in content creation. And you're going to hear that word a lot from me over the next few weeks and the next few months, because what we're going to be doing here in Pueblo, we'll be one of the first cities in the world that will be launching what's called the Storytelling Makerspace. And that's all about digital content and sharing stories. But tonight, I'm really excited. And before I introduce Regan Foster, our speaker tonight, you're probably looking at this unbelievable painting. So Vince Benavides is back here in the back. Several weeks ago, Kennedy Pugh put together, and Kennedy is in the back tonight too. Kennedy Pugh put together what we called our Speakeasy Cabaret. And we had literally everything from opera to slave gospel songs to a live painting to magic, Broadway. I mean, it was such a fun, and we have the actual recording now. We had some copyright issues. We didn't do it live, but we're going to upload that. So it was a very long evening, but it was well worth it. But Vince painted this in 90 minutes. Amazing. During that live session. So we have put this up for auction, and it went live about 3 days ago on eBay, and we've had 3 bids, and I think it's at $500 right now. So we're going to keep it going. We were going to shut it off tonight, but I think it deserves so much more. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then after Regan finishes, we have a big white bucket there who has come over the last Wednesdays. Name out of there, and they will receive a season pass last 2 tickets for next year. My flashlight went on. We're going to give away a pair of season tickets for the Dig 2022. So next year we're taking the Dig on the road, and we're going to 4 neighborhoods for 4 consecutive Wednesdays. So it'll be 16 sessions. So there'll be more information on that. And in addition to that, we're going to be drawing everyone's names from tonight, and they will get a set of tickets for next year, for the 2022 season. So with those announcements for the moment, I'm going to introduce Regan Foster, who's been patiently sitting next to me. As I do every week, I like to read everyone's bios.
You can cut that short.
They don't like it, but I sure like to read them. So, Regan Foster has been a professor of journalism in the Media Communications Department at Colorado State University, Pueblo, since fall 2020. Before joining the faculty, she spent 18 years in print and radio newsrooms across the country, writing everything from sports profiles to pieces about international trade on the Pacific Rim. Foster joined the staff of the Pueblo Chieftain in 2014 as the first woman and youngest person hired to be the editorial page editor. When she left the paper 4 years later, she was the lifestyle editor, where she oversaw of 2 full-time reporters and 9 part-time contributing writers. She most recently researched, launched, and managed a hyper-local, non-profit newspaper for an underserved quadrant of Colorado Springs. And she is proud that the paper continues to serve a voice of, for, and by the Southeast Springs neighborhood. Foster holds dual bachelor's degrees in journalism and Spanish from the University of Iowa, and a master's in journalism with emphasis on political reporting and media management from Northwestern University's prestigious Medill School of Journalism. When she isn't teaching, she runs a small business from her Pueblo County, and sometimes she even sleeps. Foster is a member of the Southern Colorado Press Club Board of Directors and a member of the Colorado Press Association's College Committee, the faculty advisor to the university's student newspaper, The Today, which recently won membership to the statewide News Collaborative Colorado Media Project, and is the founding secretary of the Board for Rational Media Limited. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Regan.
How's that for a lot of braggadocious puffery right there, right? It's always weird to hear your biography read, because there's that part of me that goes, man, that person seems really cool, and I'd like to interview her, and then I realize, no. Gregory, don't go anywhere. We need to acknowledge what an amazing accomplishment he has made with this program. 15 weeks, we threw it together in what, 6? This incredible range of speakers. It is such an honor to be wrapping this up. There have been so many times that I've either attended or sat and listened to watched the videos afterwards and thought, thank goodness I didn't have to go after that person. So it's been an amazing series. Bravo, Gregory. You have definitely earned You've earned that superhero moniker of Mr. Dig, my friend. So congratulations, Mr. Dig. So I'm going to be talking tonight about a topic that I'm really passionate about. And I apologize in advance if this is going to get a little pedantic, but I am now a professor, and I have the bully pulpit. You have to bear with me, okay? I'm very passionate about the power of journalism. Since I was in grad school in 2002, we were talking about journalism is dead. Newspaper readership decline is inevitable. It's not going to survive. The digital realm is going to take over everything. And there have been some changes, no question, to legacy media. But I genuinely believe, And it's not just because I work with the coolest students on the planet and I'm the proudest journalism professor in this room. I could say that because I'm also the only journalism professor in this room at the moment, but that's just semantics. I do genuinely believe that the young people we're working with and that we're bringing up into this industry right now are going to change it, and it's going to be for the better. So I want to start out with that because some of this can get kind of dark. So I grew up in a two-newspaper household. Justin, do you mind changing the slide real quickly? And I know I am painfully aware of how incredibly nerdy that sounds. My family consumed media. In the 80s, bear in mind, media was the legacy, right? We didn't have 24-hour cable news. The only cable you could get is if you had a satellite dish. Out in my parents' place in Northwest Iowa was pretty rural, so you had to have a satellite that could like hold a Volkswagen in order to get any sort of coverage. We did not do that. So we had basic local broadcast stations. We had radio. That was a huge thing in my family. We were always listening to News Talk Radio or the local NPR affiliate. I was that geeky kid that really liked listening to political satire shock jocks first thing in the morning. Don Imus was the voice that I'd wake up and I'd turn that on. Newspapers, again, we had 2 of them in our household. So in Sioux City, Iowa, which is my hometown, everybody got the Sioux City Journal. That was like the fundamental newspaper of record for the area. And then there was, depending on whether you were on the right side of the river, the state line, or Nebraska, you could either get the Des Moines Register or the Omaha World Herald, and those would be the papers of record for the state. They'd be the ones that would cover the state legislature, anything related to university stuff going on, stuff from the Capitol, that's where you would go. And my parents were so committed to raising informed citizens, and they were so engaged with being informed citizens that we took both the Register and the Sioux City Journal. I have distinct memories of my dad every single night after he'd get home from a long day at work, reading both papers cover to cover. I would pick up the papers, and I was a kid, so probably like looking at the funnies, political cartoons, maybe something about cats, right? But I would read those too. It was just part and parcel to who we were. So it was a very natural transition, or maybe not so much, when at 12 years old, a 6th grade instructor brought in a journalist, and I went, that's what I want to do for a living. Decided that in 6th grade. Went home and told my parents, because before then had been like an opera singing horse trainer or something weird like that. So it seemed like maybe a bit of a leap. And I kind of, okay, good luck, kid. You got this. So you go into high school, and I'm going to be a journalist, right? I'm going to go to the University of Iowa, which is one of the preeminent programs for undergrad in the nation. And my whole family went to the University of Iowa. I was like, yes, we're going to get her there. We're going to be bleed black and gold. Went to the University of Iowa, got accepted, met my mentor, who was, if you ever think of like the consummate, straight out of the newsroom, grizzled political reporter journalist, it was Basil Talbot. This guy was great. He walked in, his hair was all disheveled. He had like one sock tucked in around his pants. He may or may not have his shoes untied. He was brilliant. And for whatever reason, he saw something there worthwhile. And he said, we need female political reporters. We need more people interested in politics and government. You were inexorably raised this way. My family was always very engaged in local government. So let's see if we can't mentor this. And under his mentorship, I reached the wild conclusion that I wanted to go to grad school. And I only wanted to go to one place, Northwestern University, which, depending on what report you're reading, is either the first or second best at the time, J school in the country. And I stand here as evidence that someone in admissions that day had a sense of humor, because for whatever reason, they took me in. And they, at the time it was, my plan was I was going to go to work for the Denver Post or the Washington Post or New York Times, some big metro daily. I'm going to win my Pulitzer by the time I'm 40, because at 22, that seems totally rational, right? And I ended up graduating and moving promptly to Anchorage, Alaska. So bounced around the nation a little bit, came to Colorado in 2008 with my husband, and in 2014, I was fortunate enough to find Pueblo. And in the very strangest way, I came home. I was so blessed to get the job that I did at the Chieftain. I thought when I applied for it, there is no way. I was 34 years old. I had the background and the experience in political reporting. I have the love of it, but I didn't know anything about Pueblo. I thought people were kidding when they said the first thing anybody's going to ask you is where you went to high school. They weren't. First meeting of the city council members, they're like, hey, so where'd you go to high school? And I told them North, and they all looked at me like, this one's kind of confused. So I had to explain, no, I'm not actually from this area. But so that's kind of the way that I found my way here. And after I launched the Southeast Express in Southeast Colorado Springs, I had the opportunity to sit down with the new dean of, oh, forgive me if I mistake this, the School of Arts and Applied Sciences. The College of Humanities, Arts, and Applied Sciences. Social Sciences, something on those lines, CHAZ, right? It's this new program. It's very exciting. I'm really embarrassed, and I hope that this doesn't get back to Letitia. But it's this great program, and the dean of it is a wonderful woman by the name of Letitia Steffen, and she sat down with me for lunch, and I was talking to her about how I wanted to do a project with her where maybe we could get some student journalists writing for the Express. And for some reason, I've totally bamboozled her, I guess, because she hired me over a veggie burger to come in as an adjunct professor, and it is the best thing I've ever done in my life. As long as they'll keep me around, I'm hoping that I always joke that you're going to take a crowbar to get me out of that classroom, but I'm hoping now it's a bulldozer because that's really hard to maneuver in our building. So I found my home, I found my calling, and I am really excited to work with those students. They're amazing. Buell Communication Center is a wonderful place. Okay, so that's why I'm so passionate about this. They're the future. They're going to change everything that we see, right? Justin, you mind changing the slide, please? Oh, Walter. We love you, Walter. Freedom of the press is not important to democracy. It is democracy. Yeah, there's just nothing more to say, right? I'm done, thanks. So this is my driving ethos. This is what I'm trying to teach my students. We're having a great time. They're going to have the opportunity to interview the mayor. I'm very excited about that. They've been doing a lot of investigative reporting this year. We're doing great work with the student newspaper. Do you mind changing the slide, Justin? But I want to go back, let's get way back into that time machine, before even the 80s and lack of internet. Communication is fundamental, right? It is the foundation of everything that we do. It's the architecture on which we build. These are, and I want to make sure that I report a notebook, always useful. These are the Madeira Caves in Bulgaria. This is a 6000 BC piece of artwork that we're looking at here. We see depictions of men and women, people dancing, people hunting, animals. What this tells us, if we look at this, is that, yeah, we've been finding ways to communicate, even though this was created in bat dung at the time, for the dawn of our humanity, right? So basically, since as long as we've been around, we've had to find ways to express ourselves. Pardon me, this is falling off. There we go. Earrings got in the way. Occupational hazard. So yeah, we're finding these ways to communicate. It's critical. From even the earliest days of our species, we've had to be able to express ourselves and share information, right? Look at us here. We're packed. This is a pandemic, and we're packed in here, sharing bread, sharing experiences. Sorry, journalist gets a little dark sometimes. Just do you mind changing the slide? Because we have such an ingrained need to be able to communicate. Justin, can you change the slide for me, bud? Thank you. It's called the awareness instinct. We all do it, right? We gossip. We share information. It's not gossip if you hold your cup properly. Being able to share news, share what's going on in our world, is part and parcel to who we are. We have this survival mechanism that depends on understanding and knowing what else is going on in the world around us and what's outside of our comfort zone. It's easy to know what's happening in the immediate vicinity of where you live, right? But look at all these amazing people who are in here, who are bringing unique things to the conversation. Different voices, different experiences, different filters through which they see. That's the awareness instinct in action. It's happening right here at this exact moment. And that's a pretty powerful thing. Next slide, please, sir. History has told us, remember Walter, that there is a direct correlation, too, between the health of a democracy and the freedom of the press within it. The Romans, ancient Greeks, both they put heralds out in the town squares, in the forums, to share the news and speak the news or scream the news of what was going on in their legislatures. The Romans would actually took that a step further and would post parchment with written scripts, so we could almost say that that's their first newspaper went back to ancient Rome with the papyrus there. And then conversely, as we saw during the Middle Ages in England, right, or in Europe rather, the more controlling and dictatorial the control of the media became, or the opportunity to express and share information, the more democracy faded. Freedom of the press is not just important to democracy, it is democracy. Next slide, please, sir. So I like to start my class with a writing of the First Amendment so they all can see what we're talking about here. There is so much power in this clause. I actually had a student this semester, brilliant young man, he's my age. He's non-traditional, was in the military, came up and he saw this and he said, "Can I take a picture of this?" I'm pretty laissez-faire in my class. I like to keep things kind of loose. I was like, "Yeah, sure, of course, I don't care." And he came up and he snapped a photo of the First Amendment that I'd written up. I hope he can read it because my chicken scrawl is pretty bad. But he said, "I swore to uphold and protect the Constitution. It means something different now that I'm a student of journalism, and this is what I want to do for a living." You cannot curb the press in this country, right? It is so, the Founding Fathers found it so fundamental that they codified the role of the media in that First Amendment to the Constitution of the US. And when you think about it, okay, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, right to peacefully assemble, freedom to practice any religion that you choose, and peacefully do so, and no, you can't establish a religion, right? And the freedom to petition the government for a redrevance of governments, all the forms of communication. Communication is so fundamental that the whole thing codifies your right to express yourself. That's an incredible amount of power, and with that comes a tremendous amount of responsibility too, right? Next slide, please. It was so important to this guy, Thomas Jefferson, a young newspaper man, that he purportedly told George Washington, "No government ought to be without censors, and where the press is free, no one ever will." Free press is the check and balance, one of the checks and balances to government, right? Next slide. So let's talk about journalism's growth in the US. I kind of chuckle about this because there's this expectation that journalists are all sitting around at the bottle of whiskey. There's a reason. I don't know if there's a correlation, but there's kind of a historical connection that I think is pretty funny. And that is that newspapers in the US kind of got their foundation in a lot of ways right here. In fact, we're sitting on hallowed ground. Anybody know why? If you're a press person. This was the foundation of the Pueblo Star Journal in this bar. So in public houses, travelers would come and they'd take a cup of meat and maybe some soup or whatever, and they'd hang out and they'd tell their stories. And then the people who were tending the bar, taking care of things, the publicans as they were called, would write down the stories, and that kind of became the first version of a newspaper in the US. That's the very early foundation. So this is sacred space. Breaking bread, sharing drinks, sharing connections has long been the foundation of newspapers for us, communication for us. Next slide. Here in Pueblo, there was a time when, of course, everybody remembers, I'm sure, or at least has heard about, the Star Journal and the Chieftain being the two dailies Chieftain would become your morning paper. The Star Journal would be your evening cover, arts and culture. Chieftain was more the breaking news. They were part of the same company, the Pueblo Chieftain and Star Journal, owned by the Hogue family. And in the 1980s, I want to say, the Star Journal was closed, but it retained the name as the Pueblo Star Journal on Sundays. At one time, this community was home to more than 40 newspapers in multiple languages. Because think about the amazing melting pot and what a beautiful community this is. All the different backgrounds, people came in to work for the steel mills. They all need to be able to maintain that communication, right? So they all have to be able to do some in their native tongue. We had 40 plus multiple newspapers. Next slide. The Pentagon Papers. I actually want to read this quote to you here. The Pentagon Papers were one of the real big tests, if I'm understanding correctly, of the First Amendment, because the government had asked to bar the Washington Post and the New York Times from being able to release this documentation. And I'm not going to get too engaged in the actual lawsuit, but I want to read the quotes that Justice Hugo Black of the Supreme Court had to say when he was writing the opinion here. In the First Amendment, the Founding Fathers gave the free press the protection it must have to fulfill its essential role in our democracy. The press was to serve the governed, not the governors. For the first time in the 182 years since the founding of the Republic, the federal courts are asked to hold that the First Amendment does not mean what it says, but rather means that the government can halt the publication of I'm reading my own handwriting here. The publication of information, current news of vital importance to the people of this country. The government's power to censor the press was abolished so the press would remain free to censor the government. The press was protected so that it could bear the secrets of the government and inform the people. Only a free and unrestrained press can effectively expose. We're gonna go back to this one. Only a free and unrestrained press can effectively expose deception in government. That would have been a lot more impressive if I'd have been able to run a handwrite, you know. There's that journalism scrawl. Sometimes it's non-subpoenable. So yeah, I mean, what are they saying, right? We cannot censure media. The Supreme Court has strongly took that attempt to task. I mean, that is, if I had read it well, that would have been a really powerful statement. There's a lot of strength to that. The press is here to serve the governed, not the government. There is a direct correlation between community health and a healthy press. Next slide, please, sir. Here we go. Do you live in a news desert? So this is a study that I've been following for the last couple of years. Penelope Muse Abernathy is the Knight Chair of Journalism and Digital Media Economics at the University of North Carolina Hussman School of Journalism and Media. And she has updated since 2016 rather, her numbers every year as to how newspapers specifically, is what she's studying, are faring in today's economy. And what she's found, I want to get your responses to this. Class, pay attention. In the last 15 years, more than a quarter of the nation's newspapers have shuttered. It's about 2,100, right? Newspaper staff has been cut in half since 2011. So in the last 10 years, we've lost half of our journalists and a quarter of our nation's newspapers. What does that mean for the governed? Who's watchdogging them, right? I actually took this slide a few weeks ago, so this is still their current information. We know that this isn't accurate, right? Because Pueblo County lost the Pueblo Pulp. So now we're down to one paper. Yes, Justin?
What about the Greenhorn Valley News?
Greenhorn Valley News? Oh, maybe you just called me out on it. That may be the exception. Is that Custer? So, we have one really reliable daily news source that's working very hard on all of your behalf to get you the news and information that you need, right? Next slide, please. So this is what she had to say about this. We're at a pivotal point in our country. The loss of local news and organizations and journalists is accelerating. All of us have a stake in nurturing strong local news organizations. We rely on you. Journalism relies on you to be able to keep things going too. There's some responsibilities that citizens have. There are a lot of responsibilities that journalists have. But if you're interested in being engaged citizens, and clearly you are, unless you're here for the tacos, in which I don't blame you because they're delicious, there's an expectation that you will be responsible for the information that you're receiving and make good judgments, right? Next slide, please. Journalists are the watchdogs of your government. I have to share this because I'm so proud of this happening. This is one of my students. She is the political that was good timing. She's the political commentator for the student newspaper. And in our first week back in class, we got her into the legislative barbecue because she was working on a piece about why you should participate in politics, why you should be interested. So she grabbed the state attorney general, she grabbed the lieutenant governor, she got both our representative Danae Escar and Senator Leroy Garcia, members of each party. She had the time of her life out there for about 2 hours interviewing politicians and just asking them, why should we care? And she turned that into, we had to trim it back. It was roughly 1,000 words to begin with. She wrote a tome about it. I was like, Zoe, we don't have room for that. But she was so inspired by it and so excited by it that she went home and she just cranked out this beautiful piece of journalism for me. And we found out the other day that she got a bit of a shout out from the AG for it, so that was pretty cool too. She's feeling a little proud of that. Next slide, please. There are some challenges to journalism, right? We know this. We're doing some things to kind of mess stuff up too. It's not all hunky-dory. This is the Ad Fontes media bias chart. This is, I think, one of the best media weighing objects out there if you're ever interested in knowing exactly whether there's a bias to your sources, how they fall. What this has done is they take teams of 3, one Republican, one Democrat, and one independent, and they have them review just data, news stories. And they mark all this. All these little tack marks are pieces of data for these different outlets. And then they'll rank them. The closer you get to the top, the newer or the more original the work is. Then you get to the left and right that are the skews to the political bias. And the reason that I brought this up, and I'm showing you this particular slide, is a 2019 study, and I wish there were more recent data, but there's not, by Morning Consultant found that 12 of the 15 most polarizing brands in the nation at that time were media. It's probably not a surprise given the context, right? 2019, we're talking about like a really hot start up to election year. Administration that had kind of an interesting relationship with the press. So, and people, had pretty strong opinions about what they were reading. So I'm just gonna go quickly through those 12 for you. Some of them may not come as much of a surprise, but these are the ones that I could find that I platted here. So you can see, as I'm reading this, where they fall on the spectrum, right? CNN, Fox News, New York Times, NBC News, MSNBC, Fox, ABC News, The Washington Post, CBS News, Fox Business, Fox Nation, and CNBC were those 12. 12 of 15 of the most polarizing brands in the nation at the time. The remaining, in case you're curious, were the Trump hotels, Smith & Wesson, and Nike. Yeah, so kind of gives you an idea of some of the challenges, right? We're not helping ourselves as journalists by having this bias. And I do want to point out that these are all national brands. Pardon me. These are not the local journalists that you're going to be seeing hanging out, shooting video at Chili Fest or attending the state fair. These aren't going to be the people that you run into at city council meetings, at your Board of Education meetings. They're not going to be the ones attending events at the university and doing reviews. These are national organizations. Why do they do it? Well, as we found out from our Facebook whistleblower, if anybody watched that, anger sells. So we're not helping our mission of survival by polarizing the nation, right? So there is some mea culpa in what's going on and why things are fading and why people don't trust the media anymore. Next slide, please, Justin. And then there's this fake news. Now, if you'd have told me 6 years ago that this would be part of our daily vernacular, I would have told you were nuts. I have the same reaction to alternative facts, which is another common buzz phrase when it comes to media, right? That one I just still can't wrap my head around. This fake news thing I'm kind of like not accepting but acknowledging because I have no choice. This whole alternative facts thing, facts are facts are facts, I'm sorry. You're not going to convince me otherwise. Our defense against libel is that we were accurate and the facts were what they were. So that's another challenge. It's embedded in our daily lexicon, right? You don't like something, you yell fake news and you move on. Next slide, please. And then there are the other challenges. There's the fiscal challenge. Corporatization of media is, I think, not maybe the best thing for it, just as a thought. The more profit margins are driven in the new, like the more the bottom line is all about the profits and return on investment, the less organizations are going to be able to invest in their communities. So when decisions are made outside of the local community because they have to meet an investor's ROI, you're not going to get the best possible product. And that's a real shame because there are people who care very, very deeply about this community who are doing very good work and doing everything in their power to bring you the news and information that you need, again, to be informed citizens and to hold the government accountable. But if we don't do it, who will? And what's the end result? Government runs amok, we can't have that, right? Next slide, please. This is why, so I'm a huge advocate for the future of news as nonprofit. The paper that I launched in Southeast Springs was a nonprofit, and that was really kind of interesting. We were able to do some really unusual approaches to journalism. We were able to advocate more than a traditional newspaper would, a for-profit one. We took the community side when Southeast Colorado Springs, in case you're not familiar with it, is kind of, I compare it to like how Pueblo is to the rest of the state, is how Colorado Springs looks at Southeast. It's this beautiful, vibrant, wonderful, diverse community, and the only coverage it gets is the mayhem, the carnage, if it bleeds, it leads superficial journalism. When we took the opportunity to walk into a community and say, tell me the reality of this, share your stories, they welcomed me. It was kind of like coming in here today because this was like a big family reunion. So many hugs, so much appreciation, so much love for people who finally had the chance to tell their story. What a powerful thing that is. I get a little choked up about it, sorry. But that's what we can do with a nonprofit. If we're focused on community, we can do better stories, we can engage, we don't have to worry about making the bottom line. And the most amazing thing about it was it became the most profitable paper in the company, in terms of expense to returns ratios. We were one of 8 papers, so we maybe didn't have the huge investment of some of the bigger papers, the flagships, but we were dollar per dollar actually bringing in more revenues. And that was a huge accomplishment. We were able to do grant funding with it. We were able to do sponsorships with it, had some underwriting. It worked really, really well. And the community loved it. They still do. They still embrace it. This is their voice, and they're proud of it. What you see here is our student-run newspaper. That's the Today. That I'm so proud of that. We're now just today produced our 3rd edition. My students do all the design. They did a complete redesign of it, so they changed the look of it entirely. They're doing the graphics. They're writing the stories. They're up late with me putting the thing together and sending it to the presses so that we can run them today. They do the copy editing. They do all the work. They're getting the real hands-on practical experience. Now I just have to sell it, but that's okay. And they're getting that really wonderful nonprofit opportunity that they maybe wouldn't have if we were worried about things like bottom lines. We can give them this chance to really shine and be the brilliant young minds that they are. Next slide. And here they are again. I'm so proud of them. The future is very, very bright with these guys. They're going to be on your sidelines. They're going to be, so that's one of my students. She's a brilliant photographer. She's been shooting all of our sporting events. She was at PACFest. She managed to photograph 3 or 4 assignments in 2 days for me a couple weeks ago. And she came in and put her camera on my desk and she said, "I'm tired." That's probably the understatement of the century, dear. She's just everywhere, and she's getting really beautiful photos that I would put against any professional photographer in the industry because she's got the eye and she's got the opportunities. These are my investigative students over here with Gregory. We're at Water Tower Place, taking a tour of the facility. They left so inspired about what was coming down the pike for this community because they had the chance to get in there and see it, and they got their hands dirty, and then they got to go get a burger, and it was great. The future is bright. These guys are going to be the ones that will be in your boardrooms. They'll be the ones that are watchdogging the community for you. I genuinely believe that they will be on the sidelines. They're going to be at the state fair. They may somehow accidentally, this is for you, Ross, set their kitchen on fire by trying to make a cheesecake, something that I did once. So they're the future, and it's really strong with these guys in charge. So with that, any questions? Thank you for listening.
Does anyone have any questions?
Uh-oh.
Mr. Ebersol.
Hi, Professor. Be nice.
You know me.
I know too well, yeah.
So you avoided the 2 words that are the scourge of journalism today, I think, unless I didn't hear it. Social media.
Social media, oh.
So, you talk about the demise of...
That's a whole nother hour-and-a-half presentation, Sam. Yeah, I'm...
My question is, we've got Facebook, we've got Twitter, we've got TikTok. We don't really need these major news organizations, right?
Wrong. Negatory. Thanks, Sam. Appreciate that. No, so social media, back in 2002 when we were talking about how the newspaper readership decline is inevitable and we're going to have to figure out how to fix this, Mondays are dying, all this weird stuff, it was because Craigslist was taking money from advertising. Now, I didn't even get into confirmation bias. So social media, allows you to get the news and information that you want to believe, right? But that doesn't mean it's accurate. So I struggle with it daily because my students are on it. That's how we reach the next generation, right? So I'm constantly telling them, like, how do you curate it? If you're using Twitter, who's in that feedback loop that you're getting? If you go to Instagram, same thing. Who's on your TikTok? Where are you finding information? How do you establish the validity of it? How do you fact check it? These are all basic functions of media literacy in general, right? Not just newspaper literacy, but media literacy, things that we need to be teaching probably as soon as kids are old enough to pick up a cell phone, which in my nephew's case, he was wearing Spider-Man pajamas and a Darth Vader helmet, and he taught me how to open and set up my cell. So he was probably 4. That was a look, too, let me tell you. But we need to start teaching them early to understand, to think critically about where they're getting stuff. Social media can be extremely powerful if it's used correctly because it is it has global reach, right? We're streaming on YouTube right now. Hopefully my parents are watching in Florida. I don't know if they are. But I'd like to think it's out there. It is unavoidable. Despite what I would like to think about the Facebook whistleblower and this $6 billion loss in revenues and the fact that maybe we're waking up to it, in one day, it's not going away. So I think the solution to people understanding how to use social media is to teach them early on both its benefits and its sins. And no, it doesn't replace the need to have people on the ground doing the work, hanging out in city council meetings, coming into bars and listening to people like me blow hard at them for a while and bloviate a little bit. There's something about being that beat reporter that can't be replaced by any number of posts from somebody who did their own research or has an opinion. I'm torn between being the First Amendment absolutist that I am and wanting to give them the voice and then really wanting them to understand the risks associated with sharing misinformation, disinformation. Sweet. Me too.
Big time. So I get 3 newspapers a day. But then on top of that, you have the Colorado Sun, you have CPR, so you have, if you get too many stories from Wall Street, from the New York Times, you have to pay. You have to pay the one. So it's kind of like, after a while, you're kind of going, I'm paying a big chunk of money to get all this news. So how can it all be consolidated or do something? Because it's gotten very expensive to get real news.
Man, firewalls and paywalls are kind of a pain. Thank you, first of all, for reading all those publications and being so engaged. I really appreciate that. How to make it more cost economical. I mean, I suppose you could hope that maybe the organizations, since some of these are major corporations, would offer like group subscriptions. But there is a fee associated with getting these news outlets, right? Or there's the guilt fee for CPR. In my case, listening to the pledge drives, always makes my heart a little bit sad. Like, they want to help them. But I don't necessarily know. I mean, if anybody have any ideas as to what might make it more cost effective? Read a lot of stuff at the library. There we go, Rebecca. Yes, go to your library. Rebecca the librarian hath spoken. That's a good option. I stand corrected. There is a good option to this.
I campaign every year, hug a librarian. It's a big campaign that I do, because you guys are the social entrepreneurs for society.
Yes. Mind your social distance. Please go to the library and get all of your publications. That would be the answer.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Corrine.
Yeah, Justin.
All right, you talked about nationwide, the loss of journalism
Yeah.
obviously has affected our community quite heavily. In your professional opinion, what can we do as a community to reverse that trend?
Hold on to that. We'll come back to that. Anything else?
Yeah, we do have an announcement.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask how you funded your newspaper in Colorado Springs.
How we funded the newspaper in Colorado Springs. So we started with a $50,000 in-kind grant or donation, which covered my first couple months' salary and essentially like the office space and the computer. And then we started off immediately by selling underwriting ads. So we made a very strong point that since we're a nonprofit, we can't do anything political. We would not. That's in violation of IRS rules. And B, just because you're buying an ad doesn't mean you're buying editorial space, period. There is a distinct separation between the advertising and the editorial content. One did not affect the other. So we did some traditional advertising models. I won a $5,000 grant for the paper. We won some other grants. Through Google, there was a lot of COVID sort of assistance. But we just slowly grew the product as the interest and the understanding of it grew. We were able to increase our budget. So it was largely done by underwriting. And also we had a few donations from the public and then the grant application. So it was a mix. We had a hybrid model. Good question, thank you.
I just had a quick question about, since there are so many organizations that are actively kind of involved in the biased kind of news that is put out, I mean, it seems like journalists are in a position to police themselves. Do you think that's good enough, and what else could we do?
As consumers, that's a great question. I highly recommend that you understand who you're supporting. That I showed you that ad fontes media bias chart. I teach that in my class. That's one of the first things that we look at because it's a great way to fully understand that implicit bias, right? We all have filters through which we see the world, and so that affects how we interpret the information too. It affects how the reporters report the information, whether we want it to or not. I genuinely believe most reporters, in their heart of hearts, don't want to be writing something that is implicitly biased. That's not why we get into this industry in the first place. But I would say be super cognizant of who you're supporting, where you're getting your information, and encourage other people to be as well. So if your friends and family have strong opinions, just shoot them the information and say, here, check it out. This is what it legitimately looks like. This is what's affecting what you're interpreting and how you're understanding things. Does that answer that question? Cool. Hi, Adam.
Hi, Megan.
I'm having a family reunion. I love this.
How do we keep reporting the truth when all the local newspapers are being bought out by companies like Gatehouse Media?
You guys are trying to bait me. Hold on to that thought, too. You'll find out.
Any other questions? We're not done yet, but you have a question?
Hi, bud.
How hard was it to become a journalist?
How hard was it to become a journalist? Well, so there's a thing called citizen journalism, which means anybody who has a notepad and an interest can actually, we have blogs and stuff like that. You can start writing early. I would say maybe, do you want to write for like your school paper? Do they have a student newspaper? Could we get you into something with high school? I went to college for it. But I don't know, right? I actually started in my high school yearbook. My senior year of high school, I started doing my reporting there. And then I went to college and got my bachelor's and my master's degree. And I went to Anchorage because that's where the man who would become my husband, who's sitting over there in the baseball cap, was living. And I had a job in radio before I left Chicago. Now, if you can tell by my voice, they needed somebody with a warm body, so they hired me. But I was able to get straight into the industry and start reporting immediately. So it just kind of depends. That there's a lot of opportunities out there for young reporters. You just have to know how to seek them out, and then you'd have maybe someone like me who's going to help you find those too.
And yesterday, just as an example, PSAS Fulton Heights, their third grade class, did a photojournalism project. And the subject matter was Lake Pueblo. And all of the students needed to find someone to not only interview, but photograph. And yesterday we hosted. Many of you were there yesterday, and it was transformative because these kids, third graders, I always have said third, fourth, and fifth graders, those are the ones you got to grab. Because if you get them then, it really does make a huge difference. And a lot of you, both professional, academic, were there yesterday to really mentor these young kids, and they realized that photojournalism can be so much more. So that was just an example yesterday. And one of your, Brianna, who you mentioned just a while ago, she was there yesterday, and she got to speak with the students. So it was really exciting. Any other questions? If there aren't, we have 2 drawings. So we're going to shut off the live stream right now. And thank you, everyone, for watching.
Thank you.
I'm going to keep you, though, because you're going to draw the neighbors.
I am? Oh, man, we didn't talk about this.